Nations and nationalism are not God-given pre-existing formations. They are not natural entities. That was the basis on which many lectures actually began. It was nationalism that produces nations. There is no essence which is contained in religion or language or ethnicity, since nations worldwide have arisen out of a very wide and complex range of histories. And by no means is the European model of the nation-state applicable in a broad sense to many other contexts. Secondly, the nation-state, the specific political form that is a product of nationalism, is a relatively recent historical development. We need to remind ourselves of this. It is the product of ideologies, and as many of our speakers also mentioned, perhaps even mythologies. As Achim Vanayak in particular reminded us, even the date that we normally associate with the rise of nation-states, namely 1648 and the Treaty of Westphalia, is somewhat misplaced. It's only in the 19th century that non-absolutist independent nation-states really took shape. Thirdly, and I think this is an important point, nations need history like our bodies need oxygen. A nation without a history is a contradiction in terms. But the question is, which part or section of the history is chosen to excite that imagination and produce these myths, if necessary, and if necessary, invent histories. Within our own history, what is emphasized, what is de-emphasized? Nationalism clearly is choosing and picking from the past, as happens in India. And both Romila Thapar and Harbans Mukhia talked of why we need to explain why the period of early India is so much of a resource for this right-wing nationalism to which we are witness today than either medieval India or even modern history. Where there are regions with fewer claims to a knowledge of the past, such history may even have to be invented. Among the countries of Africa, as Arisitas pointed out to us, where arbitrary geographical boundaries were created in the late 19th century, a history appropriate to nation building had to be invented. In each case, the history has to be specified and is constructed quite differently. Each case singles out elements, and importantly, we have to understand that what is being sought is a usable past, and this usable past cannot be a very complex or nuanced past. It had to be sort of pared down to its elements, iron out complexities, as it were. Fourthly, what is our own history of anti-colonial nationalism? We are all told that the Indian people rallied around opposition to British rule, but in the lectures that we had here during the teach-in, we learned about many different regions of India which had a completely different approach to colonialism and therefore to nationalism. I would like to mention here, and I mentioned this earlier here as well, the Kannada writer and Jnanpith Award winner, K.V. Puttappa, who is otherwise known as Kuvempu, in his autobiography has said that he will still be swilling cow dung in the Brahmin's house if it had not been for British rule. So there were people who genuinely felt that British rule had actually broken the hold of many social hierarchies which would not have happened had colonialism not occurred. Now, does this mean that Kuvempu was any less someone who was patriotic? Not at all. He is considered one of Kannada's leading poets, and his love of country was definitely expressed in his poetry. But as both Arunima and Mangai showed us, Tamil nationalism, which developed on the twin basis of a passion for the tongue and a critique of Brahminism, was at an angle to mainstream nationalism of other parts of India. At the same time, as Arunima showed us, language never became a rallying cry in Kerala. So there are clearly very discrepant histories of nationalism even within this nation. How many of you know that in Tamil Nadu, they do not call this is echoing, can we do something about it? How many of you know that in Tamil Nadu, Akashvani is not the term that is used for the radio service? It is Chennai Vanoli Nilayam. They have had that ever since the anti-Hindi agitations, and even this BJP government is not going to change that, act of defiance. So the regions have spoken to mainstream nationalism in different voices, and we need to hear those voices as well. Fifth, even in the period of anti-colonial nationalism, there was no consensus about whether nationalism was an unequivocally good ideology. In India, we have had many distinguished critics of nationalism, the most well-known of whom, of course, is Rabindranath Tagore, but we also have our very own Ambedkar, who articulated a very different idea of India, as Ranabir Chakravarti and Makarand Paranjpe told us. We are getting to know now, due to research that is being undertaken in this university, about many such Rabindranaths and Ambedkars in different languages, in different regions, and above all, among different castes. People for whose predicaments nationalism had no answer. Nationalism did not have an answer for the predicaments, the very wide range of predicaments that people faced in different regions of India. 6. Once nations are created or born, the work of nationalism is not over. It is relentless activity requiring constant reminders and renewals. In short, it is, as Nivedita Menon reminded us, a daily plebiscite. We need the anthem and the flag and the museum and the map and the census and maybe even the generals to remind us that we belong to one nation. But, and this is my 7th point, the slogan, the flag, the map, the census, the museum, and the generals and their tanks are not enough. And here I want to emphasize that in JNU we also learn from our students. I was very happy to learn when Sheila Rashid spoke soon after the generals assembled on this campus that if, she said, having a military tank on the campus is a way of instilling nationalism, then surely all of Kashmir should be a peaceful place full of the most dedicated patriots. A country like India that is so diverse, which is multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-gastronomic, and, I would say multinational, except that word has been associated with such bad corporate behavior. It has led to one of the most fragmented social bodies in the world. We are uniquely divided in South Asia across all religions on the basis of caste. Producing a future that guarantees equality and justice is much more challenging, as Apurvanand and many others pointed out, than Deshbhakti based on sloganeering. Often it means that there are constant oppositions to the idea of the nation, even after it has been born, which must be challenged, which must be suppressed or defeated in order for any singular nationalism to take its place. Now I want to just mention here, because I'm a historian and that's my field of, it's the field I love most, the work of a historian called Eugene Weber, who wrote a book on France called Peasants into Frenchmen. It's a very large book, but I urge those of you who are interested to read it. But let me just say one thing that he has mentioned, which is very important for us to understand here. And that is, he says, the French never became a unified nation speaking the French that we associate with France today until after the First World War. It's happened as recently as 1918. And one of the reasons for that achievement was the wide network of educational institutions which promoted the standardized French. In order to promote the standardized French, you had to quell the local dialects, you had to kill the patois, etc. And that's what his book actually, among other things, demonstrates. In India, as the lecture by Aisha Kidwai taught us, the recognition of some languages as official languages and the language of instruction in schools has led to many languages of India dwindling and dying, while others were consolidated within one hegemonic language, such as Hindi, etc. 8. Therefore, as G. Arunima pointed out, we would do better to speak of difference rather than diversity. Why do we say that? Because India is not a space for the benign differences resembling the colors of the rainbow. Rather, it is hierarchized multiple differences that we are talking about, which are of varying kinds and varying intensities. Some of these differences intersect, some of them remain divergent, but all of them must be addressed and even subjugated if a unity is to be brought about. Badri Narayana, in his lecture in the series, told us what it has taken to bring Dalits into the fold of Hindu nationalism. It has meant producing a very different history of who is responsible for the predicaments and oppressions of Dalits and how that historical wound should be redressed in the present day. 9. Is the nation the same thing as the state, or is indeed the same thing as the government? This is what we are constantly being told. This distinction between nation, the state, and the government has been dissolved in our present day. But it's important for us to keep hold of the differences. Why have these been collapsed, as it were, today? Gopal Guru, who was the first to, in that sense, kick off this teach-in series, spelled out for us the differences between nation, state, and government, and spoke of a much more affirmative nationalism. But it was Jairus Banerjee who pointed out the dangers of a nationalism which draws equally on deep psychological structures as on ideological and material ones, to produce the fearsome, exclusive, threatening visage of fascism witnessed in Germany under Nazi rule. So is nationalism a good thing or a bad thing, or both? Is it a 19th century medicine? Yesterday Anand Kumar, or maybe the day before, we had somebody referring to this. Is it a 19th century medicine whose sell-by date has ended? What are the possible futures of a nationalism that is equitable and just? Now, unlike France, it is not until very, very recently that we even had a right to education on the card. So even that minimum right had not been guaranteed to the Indian people until 2009. So that has certainly not been the basis of producing the unity that Eugene Weber spoke about. But we have our constitution. We have a constitution as a unifier which everyone should defend, because it imagines a different kind of community, a community of equals, a set of rights which cannot be violated on the basis of a nationalism based on an essence, or, as we heard echoing in the hall of the Maharashtra legislator yesterday, a structure of feeling. It was a structure of feeling that led to the suspension of somebody who would not say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. As Fali Nariman pointed out in his analysis of the Kanhaiya judgment, some of you may have seen this on your television screens, with all due respect to the Indian soldiers who have laid down their lives defending our borders and have spent their time building pontoon bridges across the Yamuna, Fali Nariman said that, with all due respect, it is the Constitution that guarantees our freedom of speech, not the soldiers. And surely, he said, a judge should know the difference. Clearly, she did not. So as Lawrence Liang warned us in his talk, in this lecture series, let us not pin too many hopes on judicial saviors either. 11. But, and I want to end my reflections on this lecture series on a slightly more positive note. We do have some spaces that have genuinely been inclusive, such as the Central University. It is truly a microcosm of the nation, with all its differences and difficulties, and yet its commitment to a larger goal of higher education, a critical and engaged vision of the world. As Satish Deshpande pointed out while he spoke, we need to defend the university as a truly national space, and possibly the only inclusive institutional space that we have in India today. So, 12. What we have demonstrated to the country and the world is that there is a possibility of creating a community that is truly equal, inclusive, based on ideas of equality and justice for castes, genders, sexualities, and above all, thoughts and ideas. We know in the recent past, people have showed an extraordinary interest in knowing what goes on in JNU and have taken census of various kinds of elements of our garbage. Let me not go into the details of that investigation, but it is worth thinking about this fact that love has become a four-letter word. In other words, it has become something dirty and disgusting and which should somehow be eliminated from our university campus. But I would like to say that, as I believe Anand Kumar also mentioned yesterday, that many people find their partners in JNU, and many people have, experienced this extraordinary feeling of camaraderie in JNU, and that's not such a bad thing at all. What is threatening the government today is this alliance that has been forged in JNU, not just between students and teachers, and I think this is a historic first after, correct me if I'm wrong, Quit India movement. This has not happened in India since probably the Quit India movement, this kind of student-teacher unity, but it has also demonstrated that the colors of red and blue of the left movement and of the Dalit Bahujan movement have been joined in the struggle, but that is not all. Feminism does not have a color, but you all know that the feminists have been in the forefront of the struggle, a very active part of this movement. Now I suspect, and again I'm going to be out on a limb here, but I feel that this education that one receives in JNU is something that should have been extended to people like Hardik Patel and the leaders of the Jat movement. They would have had a very different idea about systems of reservations and how to politically agitate for a more just and humane society. I would like to therefore end by saying that what JNU has also demonstrated to the nation and the world is that there is much to be gained from respectful listening. We've had very provocative discussions happening in this forum, and it is to the credit of our audience, particularly our student audience, that they have not disrupted anybody, they have not interrupted anybody's speech, but have reserved their comments for the discussion and question time. This attack on JNU, which I think frankly is no longer an attack on JNU, but is an attack on the idea of the university as a whole, is something very, very crucial. It's historic, and I think we should not miss the historic nature of this struggle, the challenge as well as the struggle, because what is happening, I believe, and we need to think more about this, is that an institution is being turned into a mechanism. They would prefer that this be a mechanism rather than an institution which is alive, vibrant, and above all, asking what Satyajit Ray began his lecture by referring to as the unanswerable questions. Let us continue to ask these unanswerable questions as a way of building proper knowledge and perhaps wisdom. It has been said in the press and in much of the social media that, after all, I'm now quoting actually the words of Mohandas Pai, who is one of the Infosys founders, who said, after all, what are we talking about? JNU and other locations, there are about 5,000 students in a population of some 33 lakhs. That's actually nothing at all. But I want to emphasize that JNU has contributed out of all proportion to its numbers to the intellectual life of this country. Go to any university in this country and you will find people who have passed through these portals of this university. They are people who have learned in this extraordinary environment, who have benefited from it and have given back to the country through their teaching and research. I'll end on that note. I'm sorry I took a little longer than I should have. Thank you very much. And I hand over now.
Thank you, Janaki. I will take only two. On behalf of JNUTA, I would like to thank formally to Janaki for taking this pain to initiate the lecture series and not to leave it midway but continue for a month spreading over the details that she has given. But along with Janaki, the colleagues who have done this hard job to find people, find speakers from different walks of life, from those who can speak on political nationalism, those who can speak on social nationalism, on the ideas of, say, Tagore, Gandhi, Ambedkar, on biodiversity, on different kinds of nationalism, and that creating a kind of pool of scholars who can speak to us on different aspects. So I once again thank Janaki especially for taking this, and every day being present physically on. So even most of us, it's difficult in the academic, all of us are academically engaged in different capacities. And Janaki along with Mallarika, Rohit, Mohinder, Rajashree and Joy, these all colleagues have contributed as a team to make this lecture series on behalf of JNUTA, because JNUTA thought that how to keep this energy channelized. So thank you all for contributing. We have Rohit and continuing to the next team also. So Rohit would be there, but I would like to especially mention Vikas from CSP, because it's his effort, and this lecture series we thought collectively, but it was Vikas who himself said that can we do it, and if JNUTA says that he would like to do, because it's a tremendous contribution on your part, which you have let the entire world know what we are doing here, and archiving it in a manner which can later be used from not today, even the history which will be coming, people will be using these lectures in all forms of understanding that as a continuing protest, as mark of student-teacher unity, as mark of a debate, as an open classroom teaching, all the forms that been the time to come will interpret. But thank you for archiving it, especially for all of us. And now that's the next team which would be taking up from the Monday, which they've been announced the theme. But I would like to, in advance, thank you for taking it up from here. Rohit, Vikas will join the team also as organizer, continuing with the outreach which he is doing. Veena, Haryana, Neeladri and Uday. So I would welcome all five of you to take it from here. And JNUTA, I would definitely like to thank JNUSU for maintaining the calm, even in the case of provocation. And that's the key that which we expected them to do, and that they have done much more than what they are expected to do. And also coming every day, because I know that you are also as hard pressed as we are, because we teach, you have to submit the assignment, appear for the examination, go to the march, protest against the administration, protest against the state. It's not an easy job. I can understand that for anyone. Say people can laugh at you in their, say, insanity. But if they are sane, they will realize that what students of JNU are doing on a regular basis, at a time when there is a complete onslaught, you still are capable of doing so many things sensibly. So please maintain that sensibility. Maybe the path for a struggle is far longer than we expected at some point of time. But we hope, we don't say that in a sense of mythology, that right will win and wrong will lose. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. The right only keep struggling till they exist. So that's the only way that you can do. Do not think that you will ever win. The day you will win, you will become the wrong, and you will again start. Somebody who is right will start struggling. No, we have seen it. That's what I'm saying. Some are not specific, no specific comment for anyone, but the people who are with us, when they get into the power, they become insane. And that insanity, we have to keep fighting. So continue with that, and I think I would request the Neeladri to take, and before the Suvir will speak.